Good. We're good. Thanks.
Good. Yeah. All right. Good. So let's see. Moving on. We're heading into the holiday season, or I guess it is the holiday season, and I would be amiss to not mention turkey ecstasies this week, because this was a massive die-off of turkey back in 1960. I think it was in Britain, and caused by a fungus called Aspergillus flavus. And that's what X was. They didn't know what it was at first. They had all these turkeys dying off. They didn't know what it was. They called it X, but then they isolated this fungus as the culprit. And AFLA is aflatoxin. It produces a very nasty chemical. It is the most toxic substance made by a life form. Now, humans are pretty good at making that too, but we're doing it through our little, our chemistry in labs and things like this. This guy's doing it in its body, and then it exudes the stuff off and it kills stuff. In microgram quantities, you get cancer with this thing. 50% of the mice that are subjected to a very little bit of this on a daily basis got cancer in the liver and other places. And to put it in perspective, so this is the toxic dose. The lethal dose of nicotine that kills off 50% of people is in the thousands times more than these microgram quantities. So this stuff is really nasty. That's what it looks like. There's actually a whole class of these that the Aspergillus is making. Aspergillus, it's some of the black molds you see in the shower. If you were to isolate them and grow them up, that's Aspergillus niger, black. Flavus is yellow. And we don't have a problem with this anymore because we figured it out, and turkey don't get killed off by this thing anymore. We make sure their feed is clean, as well as our own feed. So peanut butter can have, the USDA says you can have a very limited amount of aflatoxin in your peanut butter, but the stringency is much higher for organic peanut butter. So I'm a big fan of organic products, but I don't eat organic peanut butter because I don't need aflatoxin in my feed. So just a warning, organics are good, but peanuts, maybe not so. The other thing is, one time I found some in a peanut. I was at a ball game. Maybe it was the San Francisco Giants. Opened up the peanut, looked inside, and it was loaded with yellow spores. And I was like, holy cow. Threw that back in, closed it up, threw it out, and I didn't eat any peanuts at ball games anymore. I was like, okay, I've just been exposed enough. I don't need any more of that. So that's, if you go away with one thing today, watch out for yellow mold on your peanuts. All right, enough of that. Let's see. And the other thing that one has to mention in a talk like this is penicillin, as well as yeasts. These are really important for human culture. In about 1920s in there, Fleming had a culture of bacteria that got contaminated with a mold. And they looked around all the growth of the mold, and it was clear there was no bacteria growing around that mold. And eventually discovered that this penicillium was making a chemical that they would call penicillin. And that has a huge, huge benefit for humans, right? And not a great place to express this, but in war, if you got a wound, you often died secondarily from the infections. And now, well, in the World War II, they start dosing people with penicillin after a wound. And that was a huge benefit to humans, obviously. He got the Nobel Prize in 1945, the only Nobel Prize for fungi. I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed. Okay, and then we have the yeasts that are obviously very important for bread and beer, and have been since Egyptian times and before. We just have records in the Egyptian records. So now I want to get into what I think are more interesting storylines that are more wrapped around culture, maybe. So Ötzi, that's this guy, the Iceman. He was found in a melting glacier. I think it was a glacier. It could have just been an ice flow between Italy and Austria, and in the Utztal Valley. And so actually Tal means valley. So this is Utstal. This is Utsi's Valley. No, but he's named after the valley. And I was fortunate enough to get to go there. My wife is part Austrian. So when we went and visited her family in Vienna, we went up into the Alps, and I had no idea, but I would learn later. It's like, oh, we were in the Utstal Valley. Are you kidding me? This is like a life lister for me. Anyway, he was found. He was very old. Austria and Italy, they kind of argue as to who he is, if he's Austrian or Italian. It's not real clear. The border's a little fluffy there. 5,000 years old, from 3000 BC. He had wounds, and he also had a pouch with fungi in it. That's why he shows up in this presentation. 2 different fungi, and you're seeing them at the bottom. On the left is Piptoporus betulina, and on the right is Fomitopsis Fomes fomentarius. There we go, Fomes fomentarius. Both have antimicrobial properties. His guts showed evidence of parasites. He had a parasite load, and maybe he was using these, making teas or something, or even eating pieces, although neither one of them are edible, but they won't hurt you, to get rid of his parasites. But they also could be used in wounds, and he had wounds. He had either a spear or an arrow wound. He was not in good shape, and he looks like he was running away from something very bad that he did, and they were chasing him. But we'll leave it at that. We don't really know. But there's a medicinal knowledge here that people had, that these fungi will help you. And they were used way back 5,000 years ago. So here's the Piptoporus betulinus. And most of the presentation, I'll be showing you mushrooms that can be found in our forests. Not right now, because they don't fruit right now, but in the fall, they do fruit. And you can see these. You can see these on your birch trees. This is the top. And this is the bottom where all the pores are. These are called polypores. So tiny little pores, and all the spores come out. And normally it's oriented so that they fall straight down to the ground. This one was flipped over. It's a spongy one. You probably have seen it. If you see it on your birch, you might want to cut it down if it's near your house, because it's basically eating the middle of your trees, getting the heart out, heart rot. And it's going to weaken that tree in another windstorm or 3, you might have a problem. So if you see these things fruiting, beware, your trees are getting weakened. And same with this one, Fomes fomentarius, the tinder conch, much harder. It's like a hoof. Again, the pores are down at the bottom and the spores fall down in that orientation, but we flip this one over so you can see what it looks like on the bottom. Much harder. And the neat thing here, it's not soft, but if you break it open and start a little fire in it, and get an ember going, you could blow on it, and then you close it up, wrap it, and then go to your next camp, open it up, and the ember is still there. You could blow on it, add some grass, dry grass, and you'll start another fire. So it's a way to carry fire from camp to camp. Also with chaga, which we'll see in a minute. Okay, here is even more interesting story. Also quite old. It is the origin story of the Klinglet Haida from the Queen Charlotte Islands. And this is Charles Edenshaw, and I believe his uncle was a grand storyteller and had this origin story in his back pocket. And Charles Edenshaw carved it. He was able to carve argillite, into these small totems and all sorts of fantastical creatures that you're familiar with from the Pacific Northwest. This is a plate. It's about this big. And this is what it looks like in real life, although obviously not like this. Unfortunately, it's broken, but you can find it at the Chicago Field Museum. So here's the guy I'm going to focus on in a minute. But these are 3 different versions of the same story. And here he is again. Here he is again. I'll come back to this slide in a minute. What's this one called? Fungus Man steers the canoe, if you can believe it. So here's Fungus Man. He's got his paddle and he's steering the canoe. Other creatures were tried, raven, orca, I don't know which ones, but they all spun out of control. And the notion is that they were trying to get man over to the shoreline where woman was. Remember, this is an origin story. So here's the man. And every time they got close, the canoe spun out. They couldn't, I'm going to make this in a very bad way, but they couldn't handle the female energy on the shoreline. So they, okay, can't do that. But eventually fungus man gets them there and we have humans, right? Lots of offspring. And I think this is meant to be the female energy, but it's pretty fantastical. Hard to say. Cheshire cat-like here and here, but it was this one where it really took on that strange creature. So I was intrigued with this because we think that his beard in this and this image may be a function of the conch fungus growth rings that you often see if you cut them in half. So here is a Ganoderma, and each one of these layers is a different year. And so maybe that's what Edenshaw was trying to show here. At the time I was at Berkeley getting my PhD, and I went over to the Kroeber Library, who has tremendous amounts of information about the Native Americans in California and up the Pacific Northwest. And I wanted to find this story because the Jesuits had recorded it, right? And so the Kroeber Library has all those recording, well, books. And I did find it and got a better appreciation for what it was. And near that story in the Jesuit books was a story about how they would find conchs on trees as a sign that that tree was a good tree to cut to carve out for a canoe. Now, I'm admittedly making this up. I'm tying two loose ends together, but my thinking is this fungus man was an important part of their culture because they could identify which trees to make a canoe out of. I don't know. Maybe that's why he's able to sear the canoe, but it sounds plausible that that's how this got together, the fungus man and the origin story. Who knows? Okay, here's another one. Now this is not a this is sort of building on that last story. This is Ganoderma applanatum, which is probably what this fungus was, and it makes heart rot. And but it's also the artist conch. Some of you may have seen this. This is a former student of mine, Ben Vanderstouw, and he carved a painting you may have seen before. This is where it showed up. This is the first place it showed up. That's a joke. Okay. Starry night. This is more online. This is actually better than what I could do. But this is an interesting fungus because you can carve into it and then it holds and it becomes fixed. So this is in my office. Someone gave it to me. This one, Ben didn't give this to me, except for his grade, and then he took it back. The harder you press, the darker the lines. So you can actually get pretty elaborate with these artist conchs. And so entire scenes. This one was carved by a woman at our field campus up in Cranberry Lake and just left it. Boredom, I guess. I don't know, but you got a grizzly, you've got deer, it's all sorts of stuff. And here's another one that's similar. They're huge, but what I really want you to see here is this curved line at the bottom. You'd see it here also. That's the tree, right? These things come off the tree and it's rotting on the inside, but the mushroom goes off the edge. And you can see how big these trees are and how big the fungus is. There's a lot of energy going into making that sporocarp. So there's a lot of decay inside that tree. So it makes sense that this would be maybe the one that the Native Americans were looking for, the klinglet, because they grow huge, as you can see, almost growing around the trees. Okay, back to more fantastical storylines. This one from some artwork from 1300, so close to 1,000 years ago. This empress was getting a very important item here. Yeah, she's sitting on a throne. It's a fairly elaborate throne, so she's got to be someone with some serious cred. She's important. And she's been giving this, and the darker lines are the ones that I'm interested in. These may be fungi also, but these antler-like things are very intriguing to us mycologists. It's probably lingxi or reishi. Lingxi in China, reishi in Japanese. And it's a kind of a varnish conch. It has a very shiny cap and shiny stems. And sometimes they have this bizarre antler-like form, and they could be even more elaborate. And I think that's what we're seeing here is the antler-like form of a lynchy, Ganoderma lucidum, related to the artist conch, Ganoderma applanatum, but this one's Ganoderma lucidum. The artist conch you can find in our forest, by the way, the betulina, the polypores that we showed earlier. This one is also in our forest growing on hardwoods, but it's not very common. I've only found it once. More common, and you can go to a Chinese herbal store and you can find Ganoderma lucidum tinctures to this day. Pretty easy to find. I actually take a couple of drops of this every couple of weeks. Maybe it's me or maybe it's the Ganoderma, but I never did get COVID. My kids got it twice, but I did not force them to take Ganoderma. So I only have an N of 1. Sorry. The kids got it. My wife and I didn't. I believe. Okay, whatever. Others believe also, by the way, so NCBI is the National Center for Biotechnology Information, and this is where GenBank is housed, where if you do any genetic analysis, you have to submit your sequences. So it's a depository of that went into my head so many times when I was practicing. I was like, don't say that. Okay, it's a place to put your information, biological information. And this book is in there. And if you look, it's talking about the benefits of lynchy, reishi. So we have anti-inflammatory, anti-thrombotic, hypotensive, reduce your tension, antioxidant, hepatoprotective, liver protective, antiviral, anti-allergenic, anti-cancer, etc. So intriguingly, the Chinese and the Japanese, but really the Chinese, have had this in their medicine cabinet forever. And that sort of traditional ecological knowledge is sort of, yeah, okay, maybe that's important. Western science sees it and says, yeah, but we have no way to test it. They're testing it now, and it turns out it's pretty accurate. You can challenge cancerous cells with these extracts from this fungus, and there's a reduction of growth. And so that's kind of why I'm not looking at avoiding cancer. I was looking at having a robust immune system. But maybe this has some meaning. Maybe the TEK and the SEK are coming together on this one. And there's a couple others that will have that story too. I said the lynchy, Ganoderma lucidum, grows in our area. You can find it in our woods on hardwood, but you can really find this one. This one's all over the place out there. It grows on hemlock. So the genus for hemlock is Tsuga. And so this is Ganoderma tsuga. It looks just like the lucidum, but it only grows on hemlock, and it grows abundantly. I've known people that are harvesting this one and making tinctures and teas and things like that. I have not seen any scientific studies to see if they have the same chemicals. They probably are close, but not exact as the lucidum. So I'm not sure it's a great idea to just jump over and start using this one, but some people are doing that. And again, you can find it in our woods. It's pretty easy to identify. Nice varnish cap, unless the spores are on top, and then it's dull brown. And that's where the spores are being produced on this edge, but also obviously on the bottom edge also. This is another one that I like to eat a lot because it tastes really good, and it grows in our area. It grows on beech. Grows on other woods too, but it really likes beech and dead beech, so you don't have to feel bad. They can get quite massive. Unless I'm around, they never get to that size, because I eat them. It's a wonderful flavor, very mild, way better than the button mushroom you buy in the store. And they can be pretty massive, as I say. You can get a lot out of it. Students will bring this one in and say, is this what I think it is? And they've got something like this big. And I say, yes, cut it in half. You take half, I'll take half. That's the payment here. Aromatic, it smells really good. It has an interesting texture, but nice and soft, very delicious mushroom. And there's something else going on here for medicine. It turns out it stimulates myelin sheath growth. So if you know anything about MS, which is multiple sclerosis, that's caused by the myelin sheath being degraded by one's own immune system. And when that happens, the nerve is exposed, and it's just like a exposed wire. You get shortages. And so my wife has it pretty badly. She's in a wheelchair. She can't really move around at all anymore. We eat a lot of this. And she kind of rolls her eyes and says, okay, she loves it because it tastes good, but she's not as crazy as I am thinking that it's going to make a huge impact. She's tried a lot of stuff, and this is probably the last one she would trust, but it's good. And they are modern science, modern medicine is extracting material to see what it is that's causing the myelin sheath to start regrowing on those nerves that have been damaged. I think we'll probably see something down the road that, you know, there will be a capsule that says you can buy harrison, some protein, harrison, that's derived from Hericium, and it'll help your myelin sheath. Who knows? But I suspect that's coming down the pike. Some websites are going to tell you that this fungus is really good for your memory and cognition. That's a huge leap. I think what they're saying is that your brain is made out of nerve tissue. So if it's good for nerve tissue somewhere in your body, it must be good for memory and cognition. I'm not willing to jump there. I eat a lot of it and my memory is going. So you know, what can I say? Who knows? But it tastes delicious. It's worth it to learn this one because it's easy to identify. It smells really wonderful. So when you do see it, smell it, you, oh yeah, that may be it. In all of these things, before I go too far, please don't try it without taking it to someone who can actually tell you, yeah, you've got the right thing. Or I get people to send me pictures and I'll say, yes, you've got the right thing. But don't experiment, right? One mistake could be literally deadly. This one's pretty easy. There's not a lot you can mix it up with. And if you do, it's not going to kill you. I say that with great hope that that'll continue to be true. But again, take it, once you figure it out, take it to someone, and once you've got a bead on it, you can find it next time and be confident that that is what you have. This one I grew this year, and in fact, it's putting out a second flush as we speak in my kitchen. So I bought a kit and of Hericium from a company in Rochester, and it just cranked it out. And we ate this over several different breakfasts. Nice little egg dish with some stir-fried up Hericium. Really good, sweet, nutty, and I know it helped my memory and cognition, I think. Okay, here's another one, Graphola frondosa. This one you can buy at Wegmans sometimes. It's called maitake in Japan. Hen of the woods, because it looks like the feathers off the back of the hen. And it is also, once you find it and understand what it looks like, it's pretty easy to identify. They get huge. They get really big. Again, unless there's someone like me around who's going to harvest them each time we see them. Delicious to eat. It's a wonderful mushroom, easy to cook up, stir fry. It's a little bit rubbery when you first get it. You think, really, that's edible? But it is. It's really good. And also has what appears to be some immune system health benefits. And so note that that is a Japanese word. When you have words like that, that means that that culture has honed in on that fungus and is pretty happy with it and thinks that it's an important one. And maybe it's just the flavor, but I think they actually acknowledge that there's a TEK there that says traditional ecological knowledge or health knowledge that says that fungus is good for your system, for your body, to increase your ability to withstand disease, maybe battle it. $9.99 a few years ago. The button mushrooms on that day were $2.99. So it's more expensive, but not tremendously, and it's worth it. I recommend giving it a shot. They are growing them in culture now. Here's another one that has a Japanese name, shiitake. Highly recommend learning this one. You can't find it in the woods. You can find it next to the button mushrooms, fresh, but you could also find it packaged, dried in an Asian market. And it's really good. The flavor is way better than the button mushroom. I'm a little bit, the button mushroom's great, but there's so many other better fungi. All I have to say to you is truffle, right? There's a lot of mushrooms that are better. And this one is one of them. Wonderful flavor. The stems are too tough, but you just cut the cap off and cook those up, and it dries well. A lot of mushrooms lose their flavor when you dry them, like chanterelles, certainly truffles and things like that. So you have to eat them fresh. This is not one of those. This one actually gets better upon drying. Boletus edulis porcini is another one that gets better on drying, in my opinion, although it's not bad fresh either. I'm looking at George now. Okay. All right, so this one actually I grew in my backyard, and you can see these little circles, dark circles around. I should put my glasses back on. Yeah, they're here and here. These are dowels that were had the fungus growing on them. I drilled a hole in these pieces of wood and then hammered these dowels in. And a few seasons later, I start getting shiitake growing out of, especially the birch. Look at all the white dusting. That's the spores. And I was very happy. So I drew a little smiley face. I told you I wasn't an artist. Okay, here's another one that has really good immune enhancing qualities, maybe starting to be useful for anti-cancer growth or anti-cancer features, the turkey tail. And it's all over out there. You can find the turkey tail really easily, and you can make a tea out of it. You can make tinctures and things like that. You have to flip it over and make sure. So it's got these, they're kind of hard parchment-like cardboard feel. And then they have these rings around the caps. That's characteristic. White underneath. And there's a few species that, a few things that are white underneath, but only one has tiny pores. This is a polypore. So you flip it over and it looks like there's nothing there. But if you look carefully with a hand lens, you'll notice that there's tiny little pores. Now you've got a turkey tail. The others are different species. Again, they won't hurt you if you ate them, but they don't have the acknowledged anti-cancer feature that the turkey tails do. There's a guy named Paul Stamets who runs a company called Fungi Perfecti, and he's got a, what do they call those things? TED Talk, where he tells how his mom was dying, stage 4 cancer, and he started giving her tinctures of this, and it went away. And the doctor's saying, "What have you done?" And she said, "Well, I drank this tincture my son gave me," and it went away. N of 1, who knows? But it maybe, and again, modern medicine is starting to look at this, and they're finding out that, yeah, there is some anti-cancer growth features that this fungus gives you. It's not edible, it doesn't taste good, but you can make the tinctures and extract the material out of it. Okay. This is another one that grows in our area. Has anybody seen it? That version? Okay, thank you, though. I appreciate it. That's perfect. That was not a plant. We had a hand, but when I said that, the hand went down. That's the mushroom part. That's the sporocarp, shall we say. So it's a polypore, and these are the polypores. The only way you can see this is to look at a birch, a yellow birch in particular, and guess that it's got that fungus behind the bark. You have to peel the bark away, and then you find all the little pores where all the spores are produced. This is not, fortunately, this is not the part that you eat. That's the part that you collected, right? That's the chaga, and it's the response of the tree to the wound. It's very woody, very hard. It's like a big piece of charcoal. You break that off, and you break it into small pieces. And here's Stamets again telling us everything under the sun. This thing will do everything for you, including write your essays. Just kidding, wrong crowd. Do your taxes. I don't know about all this. I suppose they're looking at it. But what I do know is if you break off a briquette version, about a briquette's version or amount, and pour hot, steamy water over it, don't boil it, and drink it before going to bed, you will sleep very well. It doesn't make you, doesn't put you into any kind of stupor, doesn't make you dumb. You could drive, everything's fine. You would never know you had had any chaga, but that night, like when I've had several nights of insomnia or something, I'll go ahead and have a chaga tea and I sleep really well. And often with really good dreams, lucid dreams. I'm not the only one that has said this. So it's a wonderful mushroom to make a tea out of it, and you can have some really nice sleeping features. Some suggest you shouldn't do it all the time, and we don't really know what's in there. Betulinic acid. So these are betula trees. A lot of betulinic acid in here. Maybe that's a response from the tree, and that's what's causing it. We don't really know why you sleep well, but you do. And again, it's not like you've had any alcohol or anything like that. You're completely normal, other than the fact that that night you sleep, or I am anyway. Maybe that says more about me than anything. But anyway, it's chaga. You can buy the tinctures from Siberia. You could buy the tinctures from around here. You could also find them It's probably getting over harvested because of talks like this. People start finding it and they start over harvesting, and it could be many years to get a big chaga chunk like that to grow. And I come along and knock it off and say, okay, I'll be back in 3 years. Keep growing, please. If you want to know how to say it, it's Ainonotus obliquus. I know you wanted to know how to say that. Okay, let's move into another one. Agaricon is getting more press these days. Fomitopsis officinalis. It's a big fungus. It's another polypore. The pores are down here. It has annual growth rings. You can kind of see them here. So it takes a long time to grow big ones like this one. But it's been around for, well, it's been around for a heck of a long time, but we've been aware of it. This Greek physician, I'm going to mess up his name, but I think it's Dioscorides. He wrote a book, De Materia Medica, the pharmacological test and herbalist test, from about the turn of the millennia. I almost said century. So around, I think he was alive until about 90 AD. But he had written this book, and in it, this fungus was listed. And it's kind of like the charlatans from the 1800s in the West. They pull into your town and this is going to cure your every ill. It's going to help your children behave better. It's going to help your flatulence. It's what? All sorts of things. It really helps everything. He thought so. And it's borne out to be true. It was actually, the text was basically the text for until about 1600 AD, which says that people were using that for a long time, obviously. But here's modern medicine. So Nature is the journal of, if you want to get a huge career boost, this is the journal where the double helix was first published a few years ago. I don't know if y'all know what the double helix is, but the structure of DNA. Anyway, it's an important Nature journal, and they have listed the anti-proliferative effects on the A549 lung cancer cell line. So this is in petri dishes where they've isolated the cancer, and then they challenge it with extracts of this fungus, and they see that it won't grow as high or as much. Same with the prostate cancer cell line. That's huge for some of us. And then there's the melanoma cell line. It's working on all three. So it seems to have a general high impact to reduce cancer growth. And I think that's important. It's also loaded with quinine. So if you're going down south, like to places where there's a lot of mosquitoes, maybe a little tincture of this wouldn't be bad, because that'll help you avoid malaria, hopefully. Anyway, let's move on. It is in our area, but it's really hard to find. And again, overharvest is an issue. I know that's a problem in the Pacific Northwest. That guy Stamets, that's his wife. He loves this thing, so he's collecting it all the time. And we're not the only ones that figured this out. They found these carved totems in burial mounds in the plains, Indians, very old burial mounds. You know, they're just now using LiDAR to discover that there was villages and towns and cities from Mississippi all the way down through Central America into South America that we had no idea were out there. We found the Mayan ruins. Turns out there's a lot more down there that we had no idea about. Anyway, in the Mississippian burial mounds, they found these things, and they were put into museums and thought that they're listed as wood, carved wood. But a couple of mycologists, Blanchette and Gilbertson, I don't know who Compton is, I apologize to him or her, but they went in there and looked and said, no, those are Fomitopsis officinalis. And they are in burial mounds of very important people, either shamans or high priests and things like that. So when that happens, you know, there's some great reverence for that particular fungus. I would put it that way. And so I suspect they really had a great, they appreciated this fungus, and we're using these totems to get people into to accompany the people into the afterlife. Pretty cool. Now we know that they're fungi. Okay, so Greeks, us, Native Americans around probably 1000 or earlier AD. Now I'm going to get, you thought this stuff was crazy. Now I'm going to get into the real fun stuff. Fly agaric. So you may have seen this one in your woods. It is a fairly common fungus, grows pretty big. It starts out orangish, closer to red, but then it fades off to yellow. Some of them are very yellow. And it used to be called Amanita muscaria, variety formosa, meaning the yellow version. But we now know it's actually a different species. It's not muscaria. It's very different. It's closely related and they look very similar. But it's not just the color form that's different. It's not just, you know, a red versus a pink rose. It's a different fungus. And the guy who first said it a few decades ago, and people said, yeah, whatever, is now getting honored, and they're going to call it Gesowii, but that name isn't out yet. Gesau was the fellow who said that. This one, I took this picture in Mendocino, California, and it's all over the Siberian area in Scandinavia, and it went down across the Bering Strait and made its way down the Pacific Northwest. And it is part of the culture in various human groups in that entire region. It did not make it to the East Coast, nor did it cross the Atlantic Ocean, right? So we don't have this one here. People say we find it, and I have yet to see it. Every time I find someone shows me one, it's this one in a darker form. So I'm not too sure. I suspect it's on, it can be introduced with pine. I know they have introduced it in Australia accidentally on pine plantations. So it probably can be moved over here, but maybe when it gets there, this guy is already there and beats it up, won't let it get established. I don't know. This one is loaded with some interesting chemicals that cause you to have visions, hallucinate, right? This one has some of those, but it's also got a lot of other toxins that do a lot of bad to you. So I've had people, and I was looking at used bookstores, looking at mushroom guides, and this guy walks, this is in Oregon, Southern Oregon. He walks this, oh, do you like mushrooms? Yeah. Oh, I eat Amanita muscaria every day. Why do people tell me this? That's good. I think that's okay. Good. Thank you. But people do eat this one, and the Sami, which is the more appropriate term for the Laplanders in Finland and Norway and Sweden and across Siberia, have been using this one in their shamanistic rituals for, you know, who knows how long, forever. They cut it up and dry it and eat it during the winter months, but they also do something very intriguing. They feed it to reindeer and collect the urine, which maybe detoxifies if there's any toxins in there to some degree. And then they drink the urine, and that the muscarin, the stuff that gets them high, if you will, gives them visions, makes it through. And so there's some interesting storylines on the web, if you want to go down a rabbit hole, to suggest that Saint Nick, who is a fairly nasty looking, he's got some bad habits of, like, the sugar canes are sort of an expression of Saint Nick, who would have a cane that he would smack bad children with. So next time you give your kids sugar canes, give them the story. It's like, it's not always been a sweet thing to get one of those. But maybe the shamans would come down in the winter and come down through the chimney, because there's so much snow, visiting these villages, and share a little bit of reindeer urine or dried mushrooms. And when he left, he flew away. That sounds a little hallucinatory. I don't know. The red color has been attributed to the muscaria red, but it's more likely a function of an advertising scheme by Coca-Cola. So I don't think so. I think this is a real fun just so story that needs a lot more validation before I jump right on it, but I can't resist telling it. I think that's part of the fun. Told you my wife is part Austrian. When we went to Vienna for New Year's Eve, every bakery was selling marzipan Amanita muscaria for the children. You don't see that in America. We are hydrophobic. Excuse me. We are mycophobic, mushroom fearing in this culture, and so is Britain. and Ireland and Scotland. For the most part, we were colonized by people that fear the mushroom. But if you go to Scandinavia, if you go down to Vienna, if you go to, sorry, the first one that comes up to my head is Ukraine. If you go to Eastern Europe, you'll find that people are not afraid of mushrooms at all. And in fact, if you hike in our woods and collect edibles, you'll find a lot of people are doing that, and they are descendant from cultures that are mycophilic. So these guys, the Viennese, are mycophilic. Children can eat them. Could you imagine, going up to some kid and the mom is right there and say, here, have a little candy Amanita muscaria, and the mom would give, you get out of here, mister. I don't want my children eating that or learning to eat it. Anyway, they're okay with it. We do put these on calendars and salt and pepper shakers and things. So yeah, there's an element that we're okay with it. By the way, that's a chimney sweep. That's to remind me that we have that storyline of them coming down through the chimney. I don't know. Okay. And this is the last story that I'll tell you today. This is Teonanactl. I don't know if I pronounced that right. It's a Mayan word, flesh of the gods. And so this is in Guatemala and environments around. And so the pre-Columbian artwork shows that they were eating mushrooms. This guy, I don't know, sure looks pretty good. He's got what looks like a couple of mushrooms, and his eyes are not too focused in my mind, and he's drooling. So he's also not walking around. He's kind of got his butt firmly planted. And some of this was recorded by the Spanish when they arrived in these codexes, or they found these codexes, these story picture plaques and things in the Mayan ruins. They were not necessarily ruins at that time, and they destroyed most of them. There's a couple that still exist. They did not understand what was going on, and they really wanted to get these pagans to stop doing this and to take on Christianity. And it's kind of a sad fact that we lost a lot of it, very interesting information, because they destroyed all this. The group kind of went underground. They still practice some of this, but they don't share it with people because they got into some big trouble by doing that. It looks like it was probably Psilocybe mexicana was the main fungus they were using and still do, but there's a whole group of them related to this genus or in this genus, but then also related genera that grow in that area. And this guy, Gordon Wasson, who was a banker for Chase Manhattan in the 50s, had been talking to another guy named Schultes. And Schultes was an ethnobotanist at Harvard. And he was going through the Amazon and discovering what vines were being used by the shamans to induce visions, become jaguar, things like that. So he was interested in the plants. He also sort of sorted out as an early undergraduate project what the peyote cult was in the Kiowa Indians. There was a guy that had published information out of Oaxaca saying that the cult down there that they were envisioning or inducing visions were using plants. And Schultes said, no, I don't think so. I think they're using mushrooms. And then he convinced Wasson, who went down there and begged Maria if he could partake in one of these rituals, if you will. And she said no. She had to protect her, her license in a sense. And she didn't want to do it. Well, he was persistent for several years and finally got in, and he brought Life magazine with him. And it was published in 1957. And it had those two words, first time they ever appeared together that I'm aware of, magic mushroom. Today, that has meaning, right? You hear about magic mushrooms at the Dead concerts, you're like, oh, doubt. But he's got a little mushroom stone back there. He jumped in. His wife was Russian, and she would hike, they'd go hiking in the Catskills, and she'd run off and pick up edible mushrooms and bring it back. He said, what are you doing? He was phobic. She would say, no, these are delicious. We're going to have dinner out of this. And these were not hallucinogenic. These were just good mushrooms that she was used to picking, and got him into that mindset. And anyway, they published this 57. If you look what happens in the ensuing decade, a lot. 1962, we have One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey, who was going down to Stanford, and he was a volunteer for the folks that were trying to see if they could use these things for truth serum. And a couple others are doing it also. He was going back up to his house above Stanford afterwards, and he wrote this book. And most of it is just a really good book on human nature, but there's a couple of scenes in there of what's going on in his head, for instance, after electroshock therapy. I wouldn't be surprised if he's like recording what was going on in his head down in these experiments that he was partaking in, volunteering for. And then you have the Harvard Review in 63. Now, Schultes was at Harvard, and he was communicating to Timothy Leary and to a guy who would eventually be named Ram Dass. And there's Gordon Wasson, that's the banker, and Schultes. And they put this out. They were psychology professors at Harvard, Richard Alpert and Timothy Leary. They didn't have their positions much longer. They were throwing big parties and sharing their knowledge, shall we say, in a very probably unethical way. 62, 63. So 57 is when this mushroom is discovered by us, shall we say, 62, 63. And of course, pretty soon it spins way out of control. And I think what happens is, well, at the same time, there was medical research going on with how these could be used for psychological issues to help people get through problems. Initially, it was alcoholism and addiction, other kinds of addiction. And they're on the cusp of seeing that there could be something useful here. But the recreational use made it so that it was no longer tenable. And so in 1971, the Controlled Substance Act calls mushrooms a Schedule I drug, high potential for abuse, and no medicinal value. And so there's no research done in the ensuing decades until recently. Lately, we're starting to see some research and some very controlled experiments that look very promising for people with severe psychological issues like PTSD, severe depression, end-of-life issues, maybe cancer that's basically got them, and they're going to be dying, and it helps them kind of like those shaman totems into the next phase, if you will. This is Johns Hopkins. There is money being spent on these. And I think it looks very promising. And I think you're going to see some medicines that are going to be derived out of this, and also usage by psychology, psychiatry. If you're interested in this stuff, this book by Michael Pollan is a very good one to read. It covers both the early history, but also what's going on today, the use of psychedelics for helping people with dying issues, addictions, depression, PTSD, etc. And what they've come up with is this thing called the default mode network that basically fires in your brain when you stop thinking. It's going on in your brain, and it's basically your mind taking back control. You've been awake and doing what you do, but then when you start to get quiet, it takes over. And when there's a stimulus, there's a default reaction that you have. And I think of, myself, when my children do something and I immediately get pissed off at them. That's my default mode. Not helpful, but it's my reaction. And that's what this is also. Every stimulus that comes, you have a trained brain that has a way of responding, and most of it is not very thoughtful. It just reacts in a negative way. And what's interesting is it's probably not helping you respond effectively. And if you go through meditation or on mushrooms, it stops working and it basically reorganizes. And this default mode network can just completely disappear. And those that go through one of these mushroom experiences for a full year, they are somewhat cured, and they can retrain how they react to things, be it in a PTSD way or severe depression, addictions. And maybe a year, this is working for about, I think they say something like 60% of the patients take one mushroom trip and they're cured for about a year. And if you think of how many medications they're taking in modern medicine for depression or PTSD, and also where is their head when they're taking all those medications? They're severely knocked down and maintained at a less than healthy, place, if you will. This is not doing that. This is basically one dosage, and it works for over a year, or at least up to a year, and maybe over a year. And having a 60% efficacy is actually pretty darn good in medicine, in psychology. A lot of the medicines that we're giving people are not even close to 60%. So that's pretty good. And the patients that come out of this will feel more empowered. They have psychological flexibility, which is where that default mode network kind of disintegrates. They're able to respond much more easily and be flexible. So there it is. This journal, the Journal of Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology News, came to my box last month, and the cover had this on it: psychedelic drugs. And the pharmacological groups are starting to now dig in and find out what's the most, clearest, most effective dosage, and what are the chemicals involved. And if we take one and try that, does it work better in this scenario versus that scenario? And they're starting to really pay attention to these psychedelic drugs. I love this: a colorful past, but a bright future. This person is under a session where whatever it was she was trying to cure, there was a several-month phase working with the psychologists. They got her prepared. They gave her a big dose, and they were with her so she would not have a fear of dying or something like that. Help her through. And then she comes back out of it, and several months of sort of retraining afterwards to help her understand what had happened and make sure that everything was okay. So this is not for everybody. We're not going to be able to just willy-nilly start using these things in every situation, because it's kind of expensive to do it right currently. But there may be some very, very helpful medicines here coming down the pike. All right, so I'll just leave you. I thought was kind of cool. What you're doing basically with those kinds of treatments is retraining. And a lot of times old dogs can't be trained without a lot of help. So thank you, Norman Rockwell, for giving me that little picture. I will stop there, and thank you all very much for your attention.
Thank you, Tom. Voice of God here. We do have one question from the Zoom audience. Okay, Robin asks, can you comment on the stoned ape theory of Terence McKenna?
Far out. The stoned ape theory is the idea that, well, I haven't read any of Terence McKenna, but I'm always asked about him. But essentially the idea, I think, is that virtually any religion he attributes to the fact that those people were partaking in some kind of drug at the time. And then they come up with these fantastic visions, and the religion grows from there. So stoned apes, we have a tendency to get intoxicated. I think if anybody has better information than that, I would encourage you to speak up now, because I should read him so I can answer that question better. Is that the person who asked? Give me a follow-up if you want.
Yeah, the theory extends to consciousness itself, not just religion, but the notion is sort of the difference between humans and other primates, by and large, came along with the domestication of cows, and the mushrooms are supposed to grow in the feces of the cows. So it's slightly more complicated, but you're in the right ballpark.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I'll have to be honest. The reason I haven't jumped into it is because it seems a little bit less data rich and more just so story, kind of like the Santa Claus part. So Wasson did the whole Santa Claus thing, and there's a lot in there that is really fun, but I'm not sure we have a good evidence that it's true. And the McKenna thing is like, that's wonderful, hilarious, great. I know a lot of people would definitely buy into it, especially those that are going to dead shows. But I want to see more information before I jump on. And I should read him. I should be fair. Is he still alive?
No, he died of brain cancer.
He should have taken some of the medicines I was just showing you guys. Okay, sorry, I don't have a better answer than that. Yes.
Can the default mode be considered for Alzheimer's?
That's a great question. I don't know. I think the default mode network is really, it's kind of, it's an overfiring of the nerves and a stuck. It's, to me, it's like the way we think is kind of like water running down a hill. All the nerves are firing at times. And after a while, they start to channelize and you get only one way to respond to stimuli, kind of like the water channels down the hill. And so to me, that says the nerves are actually functioning properly, whereas Alzheimer's is more of a degradation of the nervous system through those, what do they call those proteins? Come on, you guys know this. They're in the deer. Anyway, they're proteins that are misbehaving and breaking down. Prions, thank you, said Terrence McKenna. No, yeah, anyway, prions. So that's more of a, I don't think that's the same thing. I think that's a reduction of nerve firing versus the default mode is really just an overstimulation in one place, and you can't kind of get around the bad habits there, if you will. But that doesn't say it couldn't be experimented with and explored. All right. All good. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mycophilic in Sweden. You would never have a children's story showing little elves cutting down mushrooms in this country. And then if you want to know what is our country doing, there are prices for wild mushrooms in the Pacific Northwest in 99 in kilograms, so double it for pounds. And there is a huge culture going on in picking wild mushrooms. And I think the last one there, I was somehow tangentially involved with that. You can believe it. Anyway, thank you.